The time allocated for the daily routine has elapsed. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, mixed chair. I move that you now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House on supply.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, mixed chair. I'd like to take this time today to talk about strong and powerful women, non-binary folks, and young girls who are resilient and impactful to all communities across this province. On International Women's Day, we stood here in our place, each of us, to recognize the women and young girls around us for all of the amazing things that they bring to this world. This year's International Women's Day theme, Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress, is what we should be celebrating. My questions would be, how are we investing in women? Where is our progress? On International Women's Day, we spoke at length about how much we appreciate women in our lives and the women around us, which is why it's so strange to also hear from this government that they're not going to pass legislation to restrict the misuse of NDAs. As we know, the NDAs do a lot of harm to the survivor that extend past just the physical harm. What are NDAs? Non-disclosure agreements are contracts that were created to protect trade secrets, not perpetrators, but when used wrongly, become secret settlement contracts used to buy the silence of a victim or whistleblower. They have become the default solution for organizations, corporations, and public bodies to settle cases of sexual misconduct, racism, pregnancy discrimination, and other human rights violations. What's the problem with NDAs? Well, NDAs perpetrate the problem, as it allows a person who has behaved abusively and possibly criminally to stay put or move with impunity to another organization. NDAs don't protect the victim. They protect an employer's reputation and the career of the perpetrator, not the victim, who can be protected by a simple one-sided confidentiality clause. NDAs make victims lie, preventing them from reporting, speaking to families, preventing them from speaking to their families and friends about their own experiences or warning others about the same harms. NDAs chill the climate about the past and in some cases require coworkers to tell lies or risk being sued for defamation. NDAs gag victims permanently for anyone wishing to speak up about abuse in the workplace. On International Women's Day, we have had discussions at length about lifting up women. Last week, we heard from the government that the victims have choice. I heard from the Minister of the Status of Women say that their decisions to not move forward on this piece of legislation is because it's driven by a community level. It's driven by a community level. I'm wondering, what community might that be? Who is the government listening to, and what are the actions taken? And the Minister of Health, with her experience in this trauma-related situation, said that women have choices to treatment, and we shouldn't be the ones to decide. Sexual assault victims have choices, but I would disagree with the member opposite on that. Healing is a process, and trauma is because of an action towards a person. How are you fully able to heal if you're not able to talk about the assault? Not able to walk through that trauma because you've been forced to sign an NDA. Some women don't even come forward as for fear of repercussions and legal battles. Think for a moment, and I just want everyone in this room to really think about all of the discussions that we've had on this topic. If this was your sister, your wife, your daughter, your mother, you as a woman in this house, if it was you, what would you do? At a time when we should be lifting each other up, here we are debating the rationale of silencing women, non-binary folks, men, from speaking their truth and allowing perpetrators to walk about continuing to harm others, and some our own family. Let that sit and sink in for just 1 minute. My first reaction to this is that I have 4 daughters of my own, who I want them to feel like they are protected by me, my family, this government. Yet we are telling young girls, women, anyone who is experiencing sexual assault through an abuse of power, and some who are under NDAs, that you have choices. Choices. I'm sorry, but that's really not good enough. Myself and our entire caucus are consistently advocating tirelessly against gender-based violence. We are committed to our bill, which would restrict how non-disclosure agreements can be used, and is something that we as a government, we should all be stepping up to pass. The government was on board up until the final hour, and then abruptly there was a directive given to stop the scan and research. And now we promote victims have choice without any explanation, without any answers given. Listen, if that isn't transparency at its finest, I have no idea what transparency means. But I will say this. Think about those folks that I mentioned earlier. How would they feel knowing that you would not, that there is a government that's not defending them, that's not stepping up for them, that's not supporting them? Our caucus continues to commit to advocating for stable core funding for women's organizations. We will not back down on holding this government to account at no time. We also strongly advocate to move away from police response to mental health emergencies by expanding emergency mental health care. Our caucus put forward a bill that would restrict how non-disclosure agreements can be used. Following the Me Too movement, as we all know, there has been international advocacy to address this. Currently, NDAs can be used to silence victims and allow offenders to avoid accountability for their actions. Currently, NDAs can be used to silence victims. This is what we're promoting, silencing victims. And they allow offenders to avoid accountability for their actions. NDAs in this use are a barrier to justice and can prevent individuals from reporting or seeking support or healing, which what we've heard from the government during our conversations, they have choice. They have choice to come and talk and have support, but they can't talk about what happened to them because they've signed an NDA and they're silenced. So what choice is that?
That's right.
Survivors need to have an agency to determine their own path and resolution. Preventing NDAs from silencing survivors will allow them this agency. We worked closely with frontline organizations to develop this bill, and we were hopeful that this government could join into other history-making jurisdictions by passing this. Unfortunately, its progress has been stalled by the current government, who now say that addressing this issue is not a priority. So we've sat here for well, for myself, I've been here for only a few years, but I will say that we've heard from a number of folks in community. We've talked to survivors, we've talked to victims, we talked to those who have been through this and who have had NDAs imposed upon them. And we've had conversations with organizations that lift women up, that lift up people that have been abused in any type of circumstance. And not one of them have said that NDAs are good. Not one. Now, we know, as I said earlier, that NDAs are used for specific reasons. Absolutely, they're contracts that were created to protect trade secrets. I don't think sexual assault is a trade secret. And so when I think about what they are being misused as, we need to step up and be that support for those folks that are experiencing this, that are going through these situations. And we've heard from them here. They've been in our gallery. They've come. They've poured their heart out. They've talked about what this means for them. Some people couldn't even talk about it for fear that they would have repercussions, legal repercussions. So, as you know, our caucus is committed to advocating for stable core funding for women. We also strongly advocate to move away, as I said, from police responses to mental health, because we know that that is not what is needed. Our caucus, we know that we put forward this bill, and as well, the government was doing a jurisdictional scan to really see how we can implement this piece of legislation. And all of a sudden, the piece of legislation was no longer to move forward for no reason, no explanation given other than we have choices. So what we would like to see from this budget and future budgets is support with funding to ensure that the community organizations that do the important work of supporting survivors of gender-based violence are adequately funded. And we would love to see that in the budget. We know that that's not the case in this particular budget. We're hoping that we can move the dial a bit because we haven't had a piece of legislation put forward to ban the misuse of NDAs. And we want to make sure that survivors have the mental health care and housing supports that they need. We need to increase core funding to women's organizations across the province to ensure that survivors of sexualized violence have access to trauma-informed counseling. We need to make same-day, next-day, in-person mental health appointments available. When something happens, they need to speak or see someone in the moment. We need to make it available to everyone who needs it across the province. We need to integrate mental health services with our services associated with mental distress, such as education, family supports, and housing. We need to expand the definition of workplace violence to include bullying and psychological harm. We've put forward amendments about that on many occasions to make sure that we are actually examining the way that we put legislation forward that actually helps folks that are in these situations. We need to provide sustainable multi-year funding, and I say this often when we're having estimates that multi-year funding is super important. It's really important for nonprofit housing organizations, for nonprofit organizations to ensure access to services and any type of care that is needed, but as well to housing first. And we need to make sure that housing support and eviction prevention are available across the province. So as I talked earlier about, we need to sit and we need to think about in this moment, if it was your sister, your wife, your daughter, your mother, or any of us women who are in this house or non-binary folks, if it was you, what would you do? At a time when we should all be lifting each other up, we need to stop debating and we need to move. We need to act. We need to do all of the things that are necessary, especially when this year's theme is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. And we know how this government likes to move faster. It would be lovely if we could move on legislation faster. So I just want to say that, you know, I want to take this time today because we had really interesting conversations on International Women's Day, and a lot of things stood out. It was really interesting to see that, you know, there are a number of us women and non-binary folks in this room, and there's a call and a need to do the things that are right. The work that we do as opposition is called constructive criticism. It is not for us to tell you and create, you know, any type of barriers or rifts. We are trying to help with the legislation that's being put forward. All of us in this room, are here because we care about Nova Scotians. And that means that we need to all view the legislation and put our feedback forward to build a better Nova Scotia. And I think that's where we lack. When we talk about issues here in this House, these issues are important to Nova Scotians. It's not that we're just putting it forward because we personally think it needs to be done. These are things that come to our desks, to our offices, that come via phone calls, via emails. These are things that are important to all Nova Scotians, and we need to make sure that we address them here in this House. So I'd like to take this time to talk about those strong and powerful women, non-binary folks, and others who have experienced this trauma. Know that you are amazing, you are resilient and impactful to all the communities across this province. On International Women's Day and every single day that I stand in my place and my colleagues stand in this place, we recognize the women and non-binary and young girls around us for all of the amazing things that they bring to this world. And our hope is that all members of this House and all Nova Scotians do the same.